Hi, Steve Mirsky here. On March 28, 2008, some of the editors of Scientific American watched a screening of Expelled at our offices and had a discussion with the associate editor of the film, Mark Mathis. This is the entire recording of the discussion, uncut. The first voice you hear is John Rennie, the editor-in-chief of Scientific American. Other voices you will hear are mine, Phil Yam, the news editor, at 39 minutes and 46 seconds, Dan Schlenoff, a copy editor, at 40 minutes and 53 seconds, and another copy editor, Aaron Fagan, at 67 minutes and 46 seconds.
Well, for certain choices that might have been made in some of that. But I guess one question I did have about that is, since you were so centrally involved with a lot of the research, since you were so involved with the whole states of the interviews, you also know everything that was included and not included in the film. I guess I'm curious about, are you as a journalist comfortable that what's portrayed here, both in the overall scope of the film and in the specific stories of Richard Sternberg and the rest, are you comfortable that those are truthful representations of the facts in this?
Yes.
You are?
Yeah.
Really?
Uh-huh.
So, for example, in the case of Richard Sternberg, the film lays out the case that he was punished for publishing an article by Stephen Myers on that seems to suggest ideas about intelligent design, and that he was punished in a lot of ways. That his position with Smithsonian was jeopardized, that his office was moved, yes. Lost all that. You stand by that as a presentation?
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you've seen the congressional report that was done on that by Mark Souder's office.
Well, actually, the reason I ask is because I was actually consulting a lot of the facts of that, and I know those were the kinds of conclusions that Mark Souder was making, but I noticed that the actual appendix that supports that and all the other investigation that's gone into this significantly rebuts this. For example, he didn't lose his job as a result of this. He was already stepping down from that position because he was reaching the end of his term. He published this in the last issue of the journal that he was scheduled to edit. He didn't get booted out of his office and didn't ask to remove his keys because of anything that he did in that. That was a scheduled move that was announced to all the members of the department months before. They all did that, and and the keys in the office were later returned to him. He, in fact, continued to enjoy all the access to the Smithsonian that he did previously, and in fact, when he was moved again later, it was his own request. In fact, he enjoys more access than other sorts of, I think what his title now is, he had been a research associate and now he's a research consultant. I forget what the title is. Anyway, he has actually more rights than others of his position do. There also, it's been pretty well clearly established that he significantly violated a number of tenets of what would have been good scientific publishing, including the best way to conduct peer review with respect to that paper. None of that is even hinted at in this film. So do you still stand by the presentation of what's here in the Sternberg case?
What I would tell you is that if Dr. Sternberg could specifically address all of what you've discussed, and I don't have those kinds of intimate details. I've gone through the report, the Souder report. I've read what the Souder report says about the persecution that took place and this intolerant atmosphere that exists within the Smithsonian. Now, all of those questions that you asked are questions that I wanted to ask of the Smithsonian. I called them and left messages and talked personally to people for about 3 weeks, saying, look, this report's out here. This report is not favorable to you at all. I would like to do an interview with you for this film so that you can explain to us, where does Congressman Souder get this wrong? And I was denied over and over and over again. I mean, I've been many times I tried to get, not one call, not two, not three, probably 7 or 8, because I wanted this interview bad and was denied. Then went to the extraordinary measure of going to Washington, D.C., going inside the Smithsonian, not just one building, but 2 I was kicked out of. I reminded Linda, can't remember her last name at the moment, that...
Did you go with a film crew?
Yes. I reminded them...
You must know that it's standard procedure to kick out a film crew if you don't have pre-existing permission.
Well, here's what I do know. I know that the Smithsonian Institution gets 70% of its funding from the taxpayers, and that that this thing was.
But you know that if you go to the Smithsonian or any museum in New York, any museum in most of the country, if you go with a film crew and you do not have an appointment to bring a film crew, you'll be kicked out.
People can't even walk into this building as a film crew.
So that makes it look like that was planned so that you could film yourself being kicked out.
First of all, we only used like one or two, a few shots.
Yes, you showed the shots of yourself being kicked out.
Correct. Now let me
actually, before you just lose track, because the question is, as you said, you tried to get to someone in the Smithsonian to ask them these questions. What I didn't hear you mention is that everything I just pointed out is actually in the appendix to the report itself that I passed out. So those facts are already in the public record. And I think again, questions of what you could or couldn't get in, it's pretty clear that the story is more complicated than the film presents. You would have to at least acknowledge that.
I will acknowledge that every story in the film is more complex. You've got 97 minutes to tell a story, to lay something out. Look, what I would say is that...
And yet you still think this was a truthful representation of that. I mean, we're dealing with editors here all the time. Everybody knows the problems in journalism of trying to represent the complexities of what are there. But there's not even a hint that there's more complexity in the presentation in this film.
Look, I'm telling you that the Smithsonian has a responsibility to respond to this and not to give us the big stiff arm and not grant an interview. I went to extraordinary measures to get that interview and was turned away. Now, I think they've done something very unethical in that they turned us away when they are 70% funded by the taxpayers. Should not have done that. And so, and then the chances of getting kicked out, the chances are high. But when you have no other options, what are you going to do? So I already placed phone call after phone call, email after email, doing everything possible, standing on my head to get this interview. At some point, I got to do something beyond. And so I went in there and then got kicked out, went across the street. The new director was just taking his position. And I said, polite as could be, look, I've heard great things about this guy. That he's a great guy. And please, just let me talk to him. And it was no, get out of here. Call security and get him out of here. So, look, I think Dr. Sternberg was treated badly. Now, is there greater complexity to this story? Yes, there's greater complexity to all these stories. And it
greater complexity than the film even hints at.
I would have to go back and look at...
Is there anything in the film you can cite that suggests that there is in fact a different view of these events and that he might in fact have actually, that whatever level of criticism he received, that it might actually have been deserved? Is there any suggestion of that, anything in the film you can cite that you can point to that would suggest that, for example, that there were serious questions about whether he did actually violate the best tenets of peer review in publishing it, for example? Because I'll tell you, we all know that there's not a line in there to that effect.
I'll agree with you on that.
Okay,
I'm not. I would certainly not disputing that.
Let me move on to a different question. You had